In the landscape of world politics, the concept of a one-party state stands out for its singularity and the forceful clarity of its design. At its core, a one-party state is a form of government in which a single political party holds the reins of power, shaping not only national policies but also the very boundaries of political life. In such a system, opposition parties are either outright banned or allowed only a minimal, carefully regulated presence. This distinctive arrangement sets the one-party state apart from other forms of governance, especially those found in multi-party democracies, where a diversity of political voices contend for influence and the right to govern. The origins of one-party states are rooted in a complex interplay of historical circumstances. In some cases, these systems emerged after revolutions or periods of intense national crisis, when leaders and their supporters argued that unity and centralized control were essential for stability or progress. Proponents of one-party rule have often claimed that such a system is necessary to maintain national cohesion or to serve as the vanguard of the people, guiding the nation through transitional periods. At times, the establishment of a one-party state has been justified as a temporary measure, though in practice, these systems often persist for decades or even generations. Historically, the legal frameworks supporting one-party states have varied. In their most absolute form, only a single party is recognized by law, and the formation of new parties is forbidden. This was the case in numerous countries during the 20th century and remains true in several states today. In other instances, a ruling party may allow the existence of minor or allied parties, typically as part of a permanent coalition. However, these subordinate parties are not independent. They are generally subservient to the dominant party and serve to reinforce the appearance of plurality without challenging the core monopoly on power. Some countries have even developed de facto one-party states where, although other parties may technically exist, only one party can realistically wield authority or win elections due to legal, political, or practical restrictions. From the outside, one-party states often present a monolithic image, but their internal workings can be intricate. Centralized authority is a hallmark of these systems. The ruling party typically exercises tight control over government institutions, the legislative process, and, crucially, the media. Information is carefully managed, dissent is suppressed, and public debate is constrained within limits acceptable to the party leadership. In such an environment, the party's ideology, objectives, and narratives dominate public discourse, leaving little room for alternate perspectives to gain traction or legitimacy. This stands in sharp contrast to multi-party systems, where competition among parties is not only permitted but expected, and where freedom of expression and association are foundational principles. In multi-party democracies, citizens have the opportunity to choose between a range of political programs and leaders, and a peaceful transfer of power through elections is a defining feature. By comparison, one-party states are more commonly associated with authoritarian regimes where power is concentrated and dissent is discouraged or actively repressed. One-party states are not merely theoretical constructs, they have shaped the destinies of numerous countries around the globe. Today, nations such as China, Vietnam, North Korea, Cuba, Laos, and Eritrea are widely recognized as examples of contemporary one-party states. In these countries, the ruling party's dominance is enshrined not just in law, but also in the daily realities of political life. Historically, the map of one-party states is even broader, encompassing a significant number of countries that, at one time or another, adopted this model of governance. The motivations for doing so have varied, from the desire to forge a unified national identity in the wake of colonialism, to the drive for rapid modernization, or to the consolidation of power after revolution or internal conflict. It is important to distinguish between a pure one-party state and a dominant party system. In the latter, multiple parties may be allowed to exist and participate in elections, but one party consistently dominates the political scene, often for extended periods and sometimes through mechanisms that disadvantage competitors. Dominant party systems can exhibit some of the characteristics of one-party states, particularly when opposition parties are only permitted limited, controlled participation, but they do not fully prohibit alternative parties from existing in the legal sense. The boundaries between these different forms of party systems are not always clear-cut, and political scientists have developed various frameworks to classify them. What remains consistent, however, is the central principle of the one-party state, the concentration of power in the hands of a single political party, with all the implications that follow for governance, civil liberties, and the nature of political life. The study of one-party states, therefore, is not merely an exploration of a particular form of government, but a window into the ways societies have organized themselves to pursue unity, order, and sometimes control, often at the expense of pluralism and open political competition. While much has been written about the structures and outcomes of one-party rule, the reasons for their emergence and longevity remain a subject of ongoing debate among scholars. What is clear from the historical record is that one-party states have left a profound imprint on the modern world, shaping the lives and destinies of millions and continuing to provoke discussion about the relationship between power, ideology, and the possibilities for genuine political choice. The 20th century was an era of profound political experimentation, nowhere more evident than in the remarkable rise and spread of one-party states. This phenomenon did not unfold in a single, uniform way. Instead, it swept across continents, adapting to local histories, economic structures, and the hopes or anxieties of societies in flux. From the icy corridors of Moscow to the teeming streets of Beijing, and onward to the jungles of post-colonial Africa and the coastal cities of Cuba, the one-party state model emerged as a dominant force, fueled by a complex mix of ideology, economic ambition, and social transformation. In the Soviet Union, the world witnessed one of the earliest and most consequential examples of one-party rule. The Bolshevik Revolution, with its explicit commitment to Marxist-Leninist principles, provided a blueprint for the centralization of authority. Here, the Communist Party was not merely a political organization, but the very engine of state and society. Its leaders argued that only through the discipline and unity of a single party could the immense tasks of socialist construction and modernization be achieved. This vision, so deeply embedded in the Soviet experiment, proved both inspiring and polarizing, and it was soon exported beyond Russia's borders. China's adoption of one-party rule following the communist victory in 1949 marked another watershed moment. The Chinese Communist Party, drawing on Mao Zedong's interpretation of Marxist-Leninist thought, enshrined its supremacy in the new state's constitutional order. The party's claim to absolute leadership became a defining feature of the People's Republic, shaping everything from land reform to industrialization campaigns. While the Soviet Union and China shared ideological roots, their paths diverged sharply over time. The Sino-Soviet split in the 1960s, a rupture both ideological and geopolitical, fractured the unity of the global communist movement. This split forced other aspiring one-party states to choose sides, or sometimes to chart their own course entirely. Ideological conviction was certainly central to the spread of one-party states, but it was never the sole driver. Economic imperatives loomed large. In societies ravaged by war, colonial exploitation, or chronic underdevelopment, leaders often presented one-party rule as the most effective means to marshal resources, impose discipline, and pursue rapid modernization. The debates between advocates of central planning and those who favored more mixed economic models shaped not only the Soviet and Chinese experiences, but also those of countries like Vietnam and Cuba. In practice, the lines between ideology and economic necessity often blurred, as leaders justified one-party rule both in the name of socialist transformation and pragmatic nation-building. The appeal of the one-party state was not limited to nations with communist aspirations. In post-colonial Africa, the years following independence saw a dramatic proliferation of one-party regimes, each adapting the model to its own circumstances. The initial euphoria of national liberation frequently gave way to political instability, as nascent democracies struggled to manage ethnic divisions, economic hardship, and the lingering effects of colonial rule. In this context, many new leaders argued that a single-party system could best guarantee national unity and stave off internal conflict. In reality, the shift to one-party rule often followed military coups and was accompanied by the concentration of power in the hands of political elites or military strongmen. A similar pattern emerged in the Middle East and North Africa, where the legacies of anti-imperial struggle and the search for a cohesive national identity often led to one-party rule. Here, the party was frequently cast as the guardian of independence and the embodiment of the nation's will. Yet, as scholars have noted, the colonial institutions left behind by departing empires sometimes made democracy difficult to sustain, paving the way for the dominance of a single party. Throughout the 20th century, the global context played a decisive role in the fortunes of one-party states. The Cold War rivalry between the United States, the Soviet Union, and later China transformed the spread of one-party rule into a matter of international strategy as much as domestic choice. Each superpower sought allies among the newly independent nations of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The ideological contest between capitalism and communism, with all its attendant propaganda and proxy conflicts, encouraged the entrenchment of one-party regimes on both sides of the divide. States like Cuba and Vietnam, for example, modeled their political systems on the Soviet or Chinese experience while also adapting them to their own revolutionary struggles and national contexts. The persistence of one-party rule was shaped by a combination of internal and external pressures. In some cases, the party maintained its monopoly through a potent mix of ideological indoctrination, economic development, and the suppression of dissent. In other settings, the promise of stability or resistance to foreign domination provided a powerful rationale for maintaining a single-party system long after the initial revolutionary fervor had faded. By the century's end, the map of one-party states looked markedly different than it had at its height. In Europe, the one-party dictatorships of the Soviet bloc collapsed, giving way to new experiments in democracy and pluralism. Yet in other parts of the world, including China, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, and Cuba, one-party rule persisted, often in new forms adapted to changing social and economic realities. The story of the 20th century, then, is not just one of the rise of one-party states, but also of their remarkable resilience and capacity for reinvention in the face of profound global change. Power in one-party states is rarely just about who sits at the top of the hierarchy. It is about the subtle, relentless choreography that keeps society aligned with the ruling party's priorities. The daily reality of these systems is shaped less by dramatic pronouncements and more by the persistent, often invisible work required to maintain dominance. At the heart of this machinery lies a blend of legal strictures, institutional routines, and careful management of public opinion. Where opposition parties exist, they are typically contained, co-opted, or rendered ineffectual, ensuring that real authority never strays far from the party's grasp. In such environments, policy does not emerge from open contest or debate, but from internal party deliberations and the calculations of those with access to the levers of power. Policymaking takes place within a tight circle of party elites who possess the autonomy to set priorities insulated from the unpredictability of competitive elections or free media scrutiny. This autonomy allows for long-term planning, but it also means that state policy often reflects the interests and worldview of a narrow leadership group. In some cases, dominant party regimes rely on corporatist arrangements, formalized relationships with labor unions, business groups, or other social organizations to manage potential unrest and present an image of consensus. These strategies are designed not only to pacify labor and other organized interests, but also to ensure that dissent is channeled in ways that do not threaten the party's hold on power. Yet even in systems where the party's control appears absolute, managing dissent remains a central concern. Evidence suggests that individuals' willingness to dissent is closely tied to the presence or absence of genuine opposition parties. Without meaningful alternatives, citizens often perceive dissent as futile or risky. Some one-party states allow limited, carefully monitored forms of criticism, sometimes described as controlled opposition, to create the impression of responsiveness and to identify potential troublemakers. These managed spaces for dissent may include officially sanctioned debates, party forums, or even subordinate parties permitted to voice mild criticism. However, such mechanisms rarely extend to substantive challenges to the party's authority. Instead, they serve as safety valves, allowing grievances to be aired only within boundaries set by the regime. The legal and judicial systems in one-party states also shape the contours of dissent. Courts may permit certain non-threatening forms of protest or appeal, but they tend to draw sharp lines against any activity perceived as undermining party rule. This selective tolerance reflects a broader pattern of what scholars call judicial preferences for dissent that does not cross political red lines. In this context, genuine acts of opposition are often met with administrative penalties, surveillance, or more severe forms of repression. As a result, dissent is not eliminated but carefully managed and constrained, kept within a zone that allows the regime to monitor public sentiment without risking destabilization. Civil liberties under one-party regimes are thus deeply shaped by the logic of party dominance. Studies comparing civil and political rights in these systems to those in stable democracies consistently find that freedoms of speech, assembly, and association are subject to significant restrictions. The boundaries of permissible expression are often defined by what serves the party's interests, with deviations interpreted as threats to stability or unity. Over time, this environment can foster widespread disengagement or cynicism among citizens as avenues for meaningful participation or redress appear closed. Research indicates that attitudes toward rights and liberties themselves can become partisan, with supporters of the ruling party more likely to accept curbs on freedom as necessary, while critics perceive them as unjustified violations. The repercussions of one-party dominance extend well beyond the political sphere, deeply affecting economic development and the everyday lives of citizens. Some scholars argue that the autonomy enjoyed by party leaders allows for coherent, long-term economic planning, free from the volatility of electoral cycles or coalition bargaining. In theory, this can facilitate ambitious development projects, rapid industrialization, or targeted investment in infrastructure. There is evidence that in certain contexts, dominant party regimes have succeeded in promoting economic growth by ensuring property rights and maintaining policy consistency, yet the record is far from uniform. The same insulation from public accountability can also breed inefficiency, corruption, and policy blind spots, especially when feedback from society is muted or ignored. The relationship between one-party rule and economic outcomes is complex. Some research suggests that authoritarian stability can promote growth, at least in the short term, while others highlight the risks of stagnation and inequality when dissent is suppressed and innovation stifled. The mutual influence of politics and economics is clear. Economic success can bolster the legitimacy of the ruling party, while economic failure often exposes the limits of its control and the dangers of unchecked authority. For ordinary citizens, life under one-party rule is shaped by these intersecting dynamics. The boundaries of permissible speech and association are well understood, even if rarely discussed openly. Participation in public life is often channeled through party-controlled organizations or rituals designed to display unity and support. In some cases, the absence of political competition leads to a sense of resignation or disengagement, as many feel their voices carry little weight. In societies where one-party dominance is deeply entrenched, even private attitudes about rights and governance can be colored by partisanship, with trust in institutions rising or falling depending on one's alignment with the ruling party. The consequences of persistent one-party control are not limited to distant lands or authoritarian archetypes. Research finds that even in subnational contexts such as United States, states dominated by a single-party voter turnout can decline, policy becomes less responsive, and citizens may feel increasingly alienated from the political process. As one-party dominance becomes more prevalent, it often leads to further polarization and the entrenchment of executive-centered governance, reinforcing the party's ability to shape both policy and society in its own image. Ultimately, the story of power, policy, and society under one-party rule is one of tension between order and openness, between stability and the need for genuine participation. While such systems can deliver decisive action and, in some cases, economic gains, their legacy is often marked by a narrowing of civil space and a persistent struggle over the meaning and limits of dissent. The enduring question remains: how much stability can be achieved without sacrificing the vibrancy and unpredictability that come with true political pluralism? As the 20th century drew to a close, the political map was in flux. The long-standing certainties of one-party rule, which had dominated vast regions of the globe for decades, began to erode in dramatic and often unpredictable ways. The disintegration of the Soviet Union stands as one of the most striking examples of this transformation, its collapse sending ripples of change across Eurasia and far beyond. In the wake of this seismic event, the architecture of political life was rebuilt, often precariously on the foundations of multi-party systems, sometimes for the first time in a generation. These transitions brought not only hope for democratic renewal, but also a host of new challenges, as the patterns and legacies of one-party dominance proved difficult to shake. In many post-Soviet states and the former satellites of Eastern Europe, the end of single-party rule did not produce immediate or uncomplicated pluralism. Instead, the sudden vacuum left by the retreating party often led to the proliferation of regional or narrowly focused parties, as detailed in research on the dismantlement of one-party systems. The absence of a strong, unifying political organization opened the door to fragmentation, with local identities and interests coming to the fore. This splintering brought both opportunities and hazards. On one hand, it allowed previously suppressed voices and minority interests to find representation. On the other, it complicated efforts to build stable governments and consistent policies, as coalitions became necessary but often fragile. The difficulties of policy-making in divided governments, especially where multiple parties must cooperate, became a defining feature of this new era. Scholars have noted that coalition governments, while more inclusive, tend to face constraints and inefficiencies that one-party regimes could avoid, at least in theory. The shift to multi-party democracy, where it did occur, was seldom straightforward. Legal and institutional reforms were required to make space for genuine competition changes that did not always come easily. New democracies frequently struggled with dilemmas unique to multi-party presidential systems, such as managing coalition formation and preventing executive overreach. These challenges were compounded by deep-seated habits of political control, learned over decades of one-party dominance, and by the enduring power of party networks that had not entirely vanished with the old order. In some instances, the decline of one-party systems was accompanied, paradoxically, by the decline of party organization itself. As parties lost their former grip on society, they sometimes failed to reinvent themselves as effective vehicles for democratic participation, leading to voter disengagement and, at times, the resurgence of populism or strongman rule. Not all one-party states succumbed to these pressures. China, in particular, stands out as a case where the ruling party not only survived, but adapted and strengthened its hold. Chinese leaders studied the fate of the Soviet Union closely, drawing what they regarded as cautionary lessons from its abrupt collapse. Analysts note that the Chinese Communist Party made conscious efforts to reform its internal structures, tighten control over dissent, and foster economic growth as a legitimizing force. Unlike the Soviet Union, China pursued measured changes while maintaining a firm grip on the levers of power, seeking to avoid both stagnation and the kind of rapid liberalization that could undermine the party's supremacy. This endurance illustrates that the decline of one-party rule was neither universal nor inevitable, and that the legacies of such systems can persist through adaptation rather than outright disappearance. The legacy of one-party states continues to shape political systems in subtle and not-so-subtle ways. Where former regimes collapsed, the memory of centralized control lingers, influencing attitudes toward dissent, civil society, and the legitimacy of opposition. In some countries, new multi-party systems struggle to protect freedoms that had long been suppressed. The defense of civil rights, such as free speech and association, became a central concern and sometimes a battleground during these transitions. Courts and legal institutions played a pivotal role in safeguarding the rights of emerging civil society organizations, helping to establish norms that could anchor democratic practice. Yet the habits of surveillance, suspicion, and limited dissent did not vanish overnight, and the strategies by which citizens had navigated life under one-party regimes, ranging from quiet compliance to persuasive dissent, continued to inform political culture. The transformation of party systems in the wake of one-party dominance also had consequences for the structure of government and the policy process. In multi-party environments, policymaking became a more contested and negotiated affair. The need to build coalitions, manage divergent interests, and secure legislative majorities altered the very manner in which decisions were made. This often resulted in more inclusive, if sometimes less efficient, governance. Research on coalition policymaking highlights how multi-party governments must balance competing demands, a process fundamentally different from the hierarchical approach of one-party states. The shift also affected subnational policymaking, as regions and localities gained greater autonomy and influence, sometimes leading to political instability but also to a richer tapestry of political engagement. Even in established democracies, the legacy of one-party or dominant party systems has left its mark, contributing to trends such as political polarization and the realignment of party coalitions. The United States, for example, has experienced periods of party realignment and the emergence of new political formations, echoing some of the patterns seen in countries transitioning out of one-party rule. The protection of dissent and the management of polarization remain ongoing challenges, illustrating the enduring influence of party systems on the health of democratic life. In sum, the decline of one-party states at the close of the 20th century unleashed powerful forces of change, but it did not erase the legacies of centralized, party-based governance. The persistence of one-party rule in some countries, the adaptation of party organizations, and the ongoing struggle to build and sustain pluralistic institutions all testify to the complexity of political transitions. The imprint of one-party systems endures, shaping not only the institutions of government, but also the expectations and imaginations of citizens who have lived under their shadow. The story of one-party states, it seems, is not merely one of decline, but of transformation, a legacy that continues to evolve in the politics of our own time.